I don't even know the privileges I have. Not even aware of them until I hear about others who don't have them, and then I go, oh gosh, I take that for granted. There are many examples of privilege. Like a white male like myself has a really good chance of getting treatment and assessment and help. Racial justice is a key component of the Center of Addiction and Faith. So every year, every conference we do, and all the webinars, many of the webinars we do, we want to pay attention to the issue of racial justice, because as followers of Jesus Christ, having these privileges, how do I live with that when I know that I'm so much better off and have so many more breaks than others do? How do I live with that when my baptismal covenant calls me to care for brothers and sisters and to work for justice and peace? So we're going to highlight this always because it needs to be in the forefront of our minds and our world as we try to make this world a place that's tolerable for everyone to live in it. So when I went out looking this year for a speaker on the topic of racial justice, I came across a statistic in Minnesota. I don't know where this is in the other states, but I bet it's not far off, that when it comes just to opioid overdose deaths, Native American is 7 times more likely to die from an overdose than the white counterparts. 7 times. That's a lot. That's a lot. So I went out asking who can tell us about some of the challenges in the Native American community, and everybody I talked to said, you need to see Richard Wright. And so I found myself at age 62 still looking for Mr. Wright. It's as good as it gets for me. So Richard is a member of the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe Bear Clan Pillager Band, raised on Leech Lake Indian Reservation in Minnesota. He's a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, an active interest in drug addiction, has worked in this field since 1986. So when I asked him if he would speak, he said, sure. And then I said, oh, would you also be on the board of the Center of Addiction and Faith? And he said, yes. So I'm so delighted to have him helping with us, this organization. He's the author of 3 books, Mokwa, Ajidimu, The Way of Our People, and From Wine to Mouthwash. And Richard is the father of 9 children. There ought to be a support group for that. 18 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren. Would you please welcome Richard Wright?
Thank you, Ed. That's such an illustrious introduction. I certainly hope I can live up to that with you today. I came here yesterday and I was really surprised at the spirituality that existed with the few people that I made contact with. For me, being a part of the planning of this conference was a spiritual movement, right? There's always the hub of any conference where there's always one person that seems to pull everything together and make it happen. And that's Louise over here. I'm really amazed by her. In my Ojibwa language, we always greet the day by saying, Jueni mi shanan gje manadu. Jueni means the sun, right? The eastern sun. And a lot of times we as Ojibwa people, when we enter into environments like we have here where we're teaching, We always ask the Creator for guidance and direction, and to share the words that will benefit you as spiritual people. All of you are here as spiritual people, the way that I see you. In fact, we call you a Manadu a key, right? Manadu is spirit, a key means earth. You're spirits of the earth. You know, when God left here, we didn't know it at the time, but he knew that he was leaving. Some of the last words that he said is go forth and propagate, right? And he didn't mean go forth and make more people. What he said was, everything that you need in order for you to live a good life is here. All of the plants that are on the earth, that's for you to eat, to use as subsistence. The animals that are here, they too are here for your beckoning, for you to get your nutrients from them. The things that swim in the water, they're here. The things that fly in the air, they're all here. Everything is here. If you want to build a home, the trees are here. If you want to leave the trees alone, just know that they too have their work to do. Because when we consider our education around the trees, we know what they do. The trees extract toxins from the air, right? They extract them toxins, and then they give us back pure oxygen. I was in complete awe of that as a younger person, about 12 years old. One of the rituals that I went through was to go and spend 2 nights in the woods. How many of you have ever tried that? Alone, right? It's pitch black in those woods. There's all kinds of things that patter through the leaves, and you always get these thoughts about, what is that, right? Huh? If you're 12 years old, it's even a bigger, greater challenge, right? Because our fantasies run big when we're 12 years old. So I did that for 2 days and 2 nights, though. But the reason why I did that is because I was asked to do that by my grandfather in order for me to gain confidence and to be able to know myself and to figure out what my strengths were. It was around about the time that I got my Indian name, which is Wisag. Wisag is actually the name of a product that you use. Even today, when you had your breakfast, you used it. And that's the pepper, right? Yeah. But the Wisag is a medicine to the American Indian people, the Ojibwa people. We use the root for healing. And I got that name because the namer that I had talked to said he had went on a vision quest in order for him to get the name for me. And the spirits told him that this man is going to help people to heal in some way as he grows older. And that's what that man told me. So I figured that not at 12, though. It didn't come until later on. Didn't come until way later that I started to think about what was I going to do as I progressed out of my teens and into my 20s, right? I had a lot of thinking to do about that. It was interrupted, though. Back then, that was the Vietnam War, right? And when I graduated from high school, the next day I got on the road from the village on my reservation. I stuck my thumb in the air, okay? And I hitchhiked off the reservation, which is up near Canada, down here to Minneapolis, and I started to look for work. And I pounded a lot of pavement until one day I was walking on one of the streets in Minneapolis, and I saw this recruiting station, right? And in that window there was a huge poster, and Uncle Sam was pointing at me. Right? Yeah. Uncle Sam wants you, right? And I thought, well, I'm going to get drafted anyway, gee. But on the bottom of that, see the world, right? I said, whoa. That was the attraction, yeah. For a guy walking on the streets looking for work with no money in their pocket, that was a big draw. And so I went in there and I talked to the recruiter, and he said, because you are enlisting, he said, you can choose any job that you want to do. They called it MOS. And so I said, well, you know, I was only 18 years old. So I said, I want to jump out of airplanes. Yeah, really. And so he said, you know what, you can do that. I said, okay, put me down for that too. Yeah. So I entered the military at the age of 18 and ended up in the 82nd Airborne Division and was stationed at Fort Bragg. And the 82nd Airborne Division is considered to be America's honor guard, right? Those were the days of the death marches on Washington. They called them the Black Death March, where there were hundreds and thousands of mostly students that were protesting the Vietnam War. So I got sent from Fort Bragg to the Pentagon, temporary duty station there. And from the Pentagon, I was bivouacked to the White House. Only time I've ever been in the White House, right? And I was on the west end, which is really the front of the building. That was my guard station. And I was standing there with a fully loaded rifle, M15. And my direct orders were, if the perimeter was breached, that I was to open fire. And I thought, well, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know. But I'm under a direct order, right? And those of you, some of you can remember Kent State, yeah, where students were actually shot. And I mean, that was reality for some soldiers, having to face that kind of reality. And it was a reality for me, and I'm lucky I never had to do that. But it was an experience, a growing up experience, that got me to thinking maybe it isn't about shooting people. Maybe it's about helping people in a different way, right? I had no control over my life at that time, though. I was under direct orders from the military, and they told you to do something, and you did it. I ended up in Puerto Rico in Salinas, which is a Special Forces camp there, and they were training us for guerrilla warfare, which was really how to hump in the jungle, right? How to live off the land, that kind of thing. And I was there, I was going on 2 years, on my second year, I mean. And I thought, oh, I'm going to escape the levee. The levee was when you got orders for the Republic of Vietnam, right? And I thought, oh, maybe they're going to overlook me, right? But they had us check the billboard every day about orders, right? What they called the levee. And every day I looked, my name wasn't on there. It's kind of like being an alcoholic now, where you live day by day, right? Yeah. And finally one day I looked on there and there was my name. Yeah, report to Oakland to go to the Republic of South Vietnam, right? So I had to do a year, and that even gave me a greater sense of finding out who I was as a young Indian man. But you know what the Army does to you? They bring in these huge garbage cans full of beer. Right? Some of you have been in the military, know that at lunch, that beer is there for you. It's like drinking coffee. It's like drinking water. You can have 2 cans of beer when you eat your lunch. The same for supper, right? They gave it to you. It was free. I think that encouraged me to develop a sense of another path that I was going to take was to become an alcoholic. I don't like that word, alcoholic, though, because for me it's a stereotype. Although it is a word, I think that if we say that we recognize that alcohol is, maybe it's just something that we can't do anymore. We have to put it away. And so we admit that we're alcoholics. In fact, you can't go through treatment without admitting step 1, right? Yeah, I admitted I'm an alcoholic, that my life has become unmanageable. I remember sitting in a group and I'm saying, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to be an alcoholic. But in order to get to step 2, you have to complete. I went to treatment 5 times. And I don't know. I think the seeds were planted, right? I think the seeds were planted. Because every time I got out of treatment, I went right back to drinking. But a lot of those that are in recovery, you know that trying to stop is a very, very difficult thing to do. But some of us are so enmeshed in the drinking that it becomes a daily function that we need to do. I was up to a quart a day of whiskey. Yeah. When my body could take it. I took brief periods of going into the hospital, right? Because I'd have such extreme withdrawals that they'd put me on the heart monitor and run EKGs, and I'd be in the ICU, and they'd rule out myocardial infarction, right? Yeah, very troubled times for me. And one day on September 27th, 1986, I was sitting at a bar at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the bartender knew me, right? And he just automatically made me my drink. And he brought it over to me and he set it in front of me. And I sat there looking at it, and I even tried to pick it up. But my hand was shaking so bad that I couldn't even get it up. I had to take 2. And I got it right here. I could smell it. And something came over me and it said, if you're going to stop, it's got to stop now. Not tomorrow, not later today, right now, this voice was saying to me. And I sat there looking at that glass of whiskey, and I said, I need to leave here. I have to get out of here. And so I walked out of that bar, and it was at 8:05 on September 27th, 1986. So I'm working on 35 years of sobriety now, 35 years and one day. You know how I got there, though, was it was a road that I was really introduced to back when I was 12. It was to seek a greater understanding about who I was as an Indian man. If I wanted to heal, I had to do that. And so I entered what we call a vision quest. And a vision quest is we go out and we isolate. And we do that for maybe up to 6 days, I've heard. I've never done 6 days. But you go out and you go without water and you go without food for that period of time. At some point, I think that I experienced hallucinations, but what happened was that I had a vision of this horse that appeared before me, and the horse was white, and there was an Indian man that was sitting on the horse, and he was dressed in white buckskin, and he had a lance, a spear, if you will. And he came prancing up to me, pointing that spear at me, and somehow I knew that he was going to hurt me. And so I started to run, and I ran around a poplar stand of trees. And I ran around there a few times, and he was chasing me. And off in the distance, I could see there was a drum there. And somehow I knew I had to go to that drum. And I started running to that drum. And I looked behind me, and the horseman was gone, but there was the moon. A full moon, and suddenly the moon started to spill towards me, and it ran on the ground, and it came rushing towards me, and I ran up to the drum, and something told me to get on the drum and to start to sing, so I grabbed the drumstick, and I started to sing. And the liquid receded, the moon liquid receded away from me. And then I stopped singing, and then it started again. When I went to various sweat lodges, I talked about that vision in there, and the feedback that I got was that white for the Ojibwa people means that something has to change in your life, right? And drinking alcohol was what had to change. The liquid of the moon was the alcohol. It would consume me. It was dangerous for me. What would save you is your culture, that drum. I started to use the drum in a different way, not by singing on it, but by dancing to it. Some of you may have been to powwows and you see the dancers there. And the dancers have a special reason for going out there. Number one, for me to become a traditional dancer, which is what I am today, I had to know 7 things. And these are teachings that are important, at least for me, in helping me to remain abstinent from alcohol. I had to go through these teachings about what it meant to be a traditional dancer. And one of the teachings was to use your asema. Right? This here is asema. He said, Richard, offer prayer every day in the morning. Joanie Mishanan Gishay Manito. Creator God, we greet you. We ask for your blessing. The second thing I had to know is who was I as an Indian man? And who I am is who you see up here. I'm an Indian man. I'm Ojibwa or Chippewa. And I'm from the Bear Clan. When you say bear, black bear, you can image that in your mind. But the way that I see it is mukandwe, right? Ojibwa means, what's that bear do? What does it do? It's not just an image that's walking in the woods, but what does it do? And I started to look at the strengths of the bear. And the strengths of the bear, you ever read about or hear, or maybe you watch the black bear, especially a mama bear? If that mama bear has cubs, babies, Yeah, don't go near that mama bear. Yeah. Yeah. They're strong on their beliefs about what they do in life. But they're even stronger in what they do in terms of how they live their life. We know that it spends most of the summer eating. We know that it prepares to enter the dens around about November, December, they're in the dens. We know that they come out about February or March, and with them are those baby cubs. That's one of the strongest, most sacred times of the Ojibwa people, because we look to the bear and we see those babies that are coming out of the den, and we say, that's sacred. Life is sacred. It means new life. It means new life that, you know, as an alcoholic, we all have that capability that if we're drinking, that we can stop at some point in our life. With help, we reach out to people. I had talked about when I started to sober up in that vision, but I went to my grandma and I said, you know what, Grandma? I said, I'm having a lot of problems right now. I said, with this drinking. And after listening to me, she told me in the Ojibwa language, she said, Nijimo and mi wenja. It's really hard to define an exact definition to the Ojibwa language, because one word you can tell a whole story, right? Nijimo and mi wenja, in close approximation to what I think it means, is this thing that's going on with you. It seems to be getting the best of you. And look for your helpers. You need somebody to help you with this. And basically, that's what happens in treatment, right? When we make that decision, when we want to seek help to arrest an alcohol drinking problem, we go and see somebody and we say, hey, I need to get into treatment. Because we've reasoned out that alcohol isn't the thing for us to do. In a spiritual sense, this is how a lot of people deal with that situation, but for the Ojibwa Indian, I think for me anyway, it meant more than just seeking what we call a Rule 25, right? Because you remember, I didn't like that word alcoholic, but in order for me to enter treatment, I had to say I was an alcoholic, and I had to ask the person that was assessing me to diagnose me as an alcoholic in order for me to get my treatment paid for, right? Yeah. It's a medical necessity. That Nijimo and mi wenja meant that I had to start thinking about who I was as an Indian person. I sought help from a lot of the elders, and the elders would tell me, they would say this thing, this journey, this healing journey that you go on, it's going to become important to you. And later on we said, you're going to have to figure out how it is that this Indian name of yours is going to make you be standing out a little bit more about what it is you're going to be doing in life, right? I said that word is a medicine. I'm not a medicine man. I don't claim to be a medicine man. What I do claim, though, is that makaki is the Ojibwa word for medicine. And medicine for the Ojibwa Indian means what makes you feel good, right? Yeah, makaki bug. Yeah. Sometimes when we think about the word medicine, we think about pharmaceuticals and taking pills, and that'll make you feel better. To some extent, that's true. Western medicine can play a huge part in arresting a disease, a substance use disorder with Indian people. A lot of Indian people that I've seen over the years, and that's been thousands of people, have said, I don't know about this word God, Richard. I said, I understand about Gije Manadu, that greater spirit that exists, but I don't understand the word God. And they have that sense of understanding because the word God is an English word, right? It's viewed as a word that's colonial. And I said, well, you know what? Think of it as an acronym, right? Just think that now you're changing your life around to start to live your life in a good, orderly direction, right? You're putting things together. Bimadaziwen, I would tell them. Live this life according to how God asks us to do. Go forth and propagate. Bring those rituals and traditions into your life according to who you are. I think it's important to know that when we treat the American Indian population, that we really, really need to understand them as tribal people. In the United States, just in the continental, not even counting Alaska, there are over 600 tribes. Yeah, federally recognized tribes. In Minnesota alone, there's 11. There's 4 Sioux reservations, and the rest are Ojibwa. Each has its own distinct language. I'm from Leech Lake. Red Lake is nearby. And our dialects are different. Right? The words are the same, but the prefix and the syntax of it can change a word entirely. If we take the word Ningusis, right, which means my boy, yeah, in the Red Lake dialect, they would say Ningus, Ningus, or it becomes a matter of ownership, right? It could be a father saying that to their son, right? That means that you're of my blood. I brought you into this world. It's a very difficult language to learn. One of the educators that I listened to one year, in fact it was in Alaska, and was standing up at the podium and said, you know what, we as Indian people, we really need to understand who we are as Indian people. Because, for example, she said, when you leave this building here, and you walk out them doors and there's cars that are driving by, the first thing that person in the car is going to say, oh, there's an Indian person, right? Yeah, that's a very distinct recognition. And I say, well, you know what, you're exactly right. We really need to know who we are. And those were one of the discussions that I had when I entered that traditional dancing field, was getting to know who I was. You know, we Indian people that work in treatment programs, we talk about Diwe Igan, and that's that drum again. Diwe again means from the heart. All of you here, whether you realize it or not, became familiar with the drum the day that you were maybe about your 16th, 17th, and 18th day of conception, right? When your hearing started to develop in your mom's stomach. Yeah. What became familiar was that drum, systolic, diastolic. that represented safety. Right? Babies move around a lot. They want to get closer to that D-way again, that heartbeat. I guess for some reason they understand the safety of that sound. And it's warm in there. It's 98 degrees in there. When they come out, they start to cry because the environment's hostile. It might be too cold for them, so they start crying. And so whoever's delivering the baby will put mom here, right? And babies are comforted because they can hear that drum again. Why it's so important that when babies are born that they're put right here so that they can get a sense of that safety that they felt when they were in the womb. And they could hear mom's voice. That was the voice that they were familiar with. I'm always very entranced when I hear that babies are taken away and that moms aren't allowed to hold them after birth. You know, I've also worked in the corrections field. When I got out of the university, my first job was being a probation officer in Hennepin County. I was doing PSIs in district court. And the experiences that I've had with the termination of parental rights is very extreme to the Indian people because of that philosophy that we have. Mothers need to be nurturing their children, and it's not always possible. I had to know that D-way again, that drum, the reason why it existed in those stories about why is it so important for Indian people. And then I had to look out and I see who you are. All of you here. Manaduaki, you're spirits of the earth. You're my audience. I have to know who you are to try to get an idea of your professions. And I don't know the kind of work that you do, but I know that you're all what I would call skabe, your helpers. First of all, you came to a sense of reasoning that maybe this is the work that you wanted to stay involved in for the rest of your life. Maybe you're like me, or maybe you're recovering, you reasoned out that what made you feel good or what made you feel bad was a sense of reasoning, a virtue that God gave you. You know what feels good, you know what feels bad. And by that reasoning, you made a determination of what it is that you do in these days, whether or not you wanted to quit drinking, whether or not you wanted to become a correctional officer, a lawyer, a judge, whatever your profession is. You're helping in some way. It's not our job to create these walls for people. It's to help break them down, right? Child protection service is exactly what it is. It protects the child. In some cases, children need protection. They're very sacred. Children are viewed as to be very sacred. We want to protect them as much as we can. The other thing that I had to learn was those songs. There's a lot of different songs. In fact, one of my friends, the late Dr. Cecil Whitehat, he and I attended a lot of conferences like this. And I would tease him like a lot of Indian people tease each other. They use humor, right? And I said, you know what, Cecil? I said, you sue people. I said, you have a song for everything. I said, you even have a song for changing the light bulb, right? Yeah. Cecil and I used to attend the conference in Fond du Lac called the Maids Conference, where we would, at the end of the day, like you are experiencing here, you had to have a little social time, right? The conference would put on these activities for you that would take up your evening. And one of those that it's pretty customary is they had karaoke, right? Yeah. So Cecil and I are up there, and in fact, we won the first prize for our act. Yeah. But we started singing The Twist. Y'all know that song, right? Chubby Checker. Yeah, we were up there just dancing around and singing. Yeah. And so we won first prize for that. And I say that because Cecil was one of the most influential people in my life when it comes to developing individual treatment plans for American Indian people. The first thing he says is, you know, Richard, I did this research in order for me to get my PhD. And my research was on families of American Indian heritage. Are they traditional? And he developed this assessment tool. In the course of his research, and he looked at a lot of different people in different treatment centers and what was being effective and what was not, he always found we need to go back to our culture. We need to know who we are as Indian people. He said, I'm Dakota, I'm not Sioux. I'm a Dakota man. You're an Ojibwa man, you're Chippewa. And I would tease him back and I would say, Cecil, I said, you know what? I said, when you read the books, the English books, the words describe me as a Chippewa, right? C-H-I-P-P-E-W-A. I said, where'd they get that word from? I said, if you put an O in front of that word, right? Now say it. Oh, Chippewa, right? It's the same thing. And he'd laugh. And he would laugh. One of the things about working in treatment programs is that humor is such an integral part of any treatment plan. It got to the point that I would always try to find a way to integrate a way to be silly in treatment, right? I would call it give it back, give something back. Because Indian people are always people that show their generosity for the virtue of sharing, being kind to each other, being honest with each other. Gives us strength in what it is that we're setting out to do. In fact, that's the philosophy of the book that I wrote that came out in 4 years ago, called The Way of Our People. I talk about those virtues. I said, we need to do that. And he said, well, one of the strongest things that we do as Indian people is already in our blood, Richard, he says, because we tend to want to give our CD counselors gifts because they helped us with our sobriety. They helped us to obtain sobriety, right? I said, but our treatment programs don't allow us to do that, Cecil. Because our CD counselors aren't allowed to accept gifts, right? It's an ethical consideration. And he said, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. He said, but how do we change that? How do we change it? Not that it's a barrier. The way that he suggested was that we can always sing. He said, Richard, that's one of the biggest things that we have is we can share our voice with them, and when they get up and give us that medallion that says that we graduated, why can't we get that drum and start to sing? Yeah. Sing to them, because it's healing. It encourages them, It gives them thanks for what it is that they've given to us, and it makes us feel good. It's that medicine that we talk about. It makes us feel good to be able to do that. And I said, you know what, Cecil, you're absolutely right. When I started to write that book, I was maybe 5 years into being sober. And I attended a lot of different AA meetings. I was working in programs that relied on federal grants, right? So I was changing jobs a lot, but you know, when you work for the federal government or the state, there's always opportunities to travel. And I did a lot of traveling all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast, all the way down into California. And the one thing that I always looked for was an Indian AA meeting. Right? I always sat in an Indian AA meeting. And I would listen to those stories about the challenges that American Indian people faced trying to get sober. A lot of emotions in there, a lot of sharing, though, of those emotions. A lot of being honest with Indian people, and Indian people can be very descriptive when they're talking about their feelings. Some of that can be a lot of anger. Some of that can be a lot of sadness. A man that I listened to had spent 17 years in prison. He'd went to prison because of a drinking-related offense. He said, I spent 17 years in prison. When I got out, my family met me at the door in a limousine, and there was alcohol in that limousine. He said, I picked up right where I left off. He said, 2 weeks later, I woke up and I was in a situation that I knew that I was going to go back to prison. That's the way this disease is. It's mysterious. It takes us places that we don't want to be. Sometimes we don't have control over that. And I did come back to prison. And I did a few more years and got out again. But I had to think and reason out that what I was doing, I had to stop. And how could I do that? He said, like you, Richard, I started to think about who I was as an Indian man, and I started to think about my culture. Because my culture is important to me. You know, Indian people, we say that our culture is our language. All those 600 tribes that exist here, I said, have their own language. Their words are undefinable. We can't define them, they're stories. About the year of 2009, after becoming a traditional dancer, I started to think about, what is it about Christianity and American Indian culture? Why is it different? Why does it have to be different? And I decided to enter the seminary, and so I entered the St. Paul Seminary. I wanted to know. And I sat there listening in all of those classes that I went to in the evening, on weekends, Sunday morning Mass. And I could see all of the parallels that exist. We're the same, no matter what our religion is, no matter who we call God, in what language. It's all the same. I think about Jueni Mishanan Gijay Manadu, and I think about the story in the Bible about those 3 wise men that looked in the sky, in the eastern sky, and they saw that star that was over Jerusalem, and that was where they were going to find our Savior. That was where they were going to find baby Jesus. And that's the way they went. They traveled there. They knew. The Indian people, we use this sema, and we hold it up to that eastern star. And we ask God for direction on our day. And I sat there thinking, that's a similarity. We're not any different. We pray to the same God. Dr. Whitehead once said, he said, you know what, we used to live in those teepees. He said, there's 13 teepee poles. He said, and if every one of those poles represented a religion from a different part of the world, he said, eventually they all meet at the apex, right? They all come together, it's the same thing, it's the same God, no matter what. Same person. I said, you're absolutely right, Cecil. I said, I call him Gijay Manadu. Other people have different names for it. It's just a matter of words, the words that we choose to use. I want to share with you that I've worked in a lot of different residential treatment programs, and one of the toughest ones where I did my internship was at Eden House. And Eden House was an aftercare program for re-entry from men coming out of prison. So it was prophylactic for like heroin and cocaine, all those really tough drugs. I spent 11 years there. And then one time I said, I also want to find out what it is, because we say this disease that we have, it afflicts everybody. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy or if you're poor, it just comes to you. And for some reason I thought, well, maybe I think I'm going to take a look at the Hazelton Foundation, Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation. And I thought to myself, they're not going to hire me, right? So I put in an application there, and they invited me out to interview, and I went out there once, and then they invited me back, and then they offered me a salary, and I said, I don't want to go to work at Hazelton. And then they invited me to come back, and I made another job, salary offer to me, and that was too much money to turn down. Yeah. Without realizing it, my negotiations worked for me. Yeah. And I was out there for 1 year, and then I decided I needed to come back to my American Indian community, and I'm where I'm at now. I'm a provider at the American clinic called the Indian Health Board. And the Indian Health Board was formed because medicine, at least Western medicine, was not always available to Indian people in the way that it is now. There's a movie that's called Why Did Gloria Have to Die? And Gloria was an Indian woman who fell to the environment, and after she sought medical care at a local hospital, and she was found froze to death. And the Indian community erupted at that. And they got together and said, we have to form our own clinic. We have to get our own doctors. Today, the Indian Health Board is one of 19 Indian health boards all across the country. Our doctors are all American Indian. We have full psychiatry, dentistry. We have those ancillary programs of diabetes management. I'm thinking of retiring soon. I don't know when that'll be. I actually gave my resignation once. And they asked me to stay. They asked me to help develop an outpatient program to treat American Indian people. And it's now licensed. We're licensed to open. I think that as we look into the future, I would like, because it's not a reality, to have a residential program in Minneapolis for American Indian people. It's needed. It's needed because if we looked at the trends, and somebody, Ed Treat was talking about, what are the trends? The trends are those harsh drugs. You see them on the avenues in Minneapolis. And how do we find a way to help them? How do we even find a way to deal with the homelessness that exists out there? It's not only Minneapolis, it's all over. The Indian Health Board recently received a $500,000 opiate grant. And I was fortunate enough to think that I may have been a part of that money coming, because at one point I was a strong advocate in speaking to the CDC about recognizing that heroin was an epidemic in Minneapolis. And only then could the CDC say, well, we agree with it. We agree with the American Indian people. And once they had that agreement, then they could start funneling some block grant programs, start generating money to the American Indian communities. And that's what's happening now. We're getting this opiate money, not only Minneapolis, but all of the reservations. There's opiate summits all across the 11 reservations in Minnesota because of the severity of the problem. The fentanyl, for example. Sometimes I talk to people that about this COVID, and they're not wearing masks, and I say, are you vaccinated? And they say, no. Oh, why not? Because I don't know what's in there. Yeah. But they're willing to pop a pin in their arm, right? I don't say that to them, but it's reality. I was talking to Bob. Bob works at Keystone. It's a cultural regional center for the treatment of American Indians. We need to have more of those kind of programs on all of the reservations, and it is happening. A lot of us here might know 245G, Minnesota DHS licensing, right? On Minnesota reservations, we are sovereign now, and I think that we're starting to recognize that, and we're starting to put together our own programs. We're licensing our own programs. We don't need to rely on DHS anymore. We're starting to access federal monies that are allotments for special populations treatment, meaning American Indian people, because the trends are so severe in Indian country. How do we stop this? How can we all get together and work towards a solution of all of the substance use disorders that are occurring on the reservations? We have to find a way. And the way is back to our culture. That's what we're saying. Return to our culture. We need to use our medicines. We have to be able to pray. We have to be able to use our eagle feathers. We have to be able to use our sage for purification. And we have to be able to use our cedar for purification. Those medicines. But they're not allowed in 245G programs. Yeah, because we're still considered to be, in some senses, offensive to a using population. Sage, for example, smells like marijuana, right? A stereotype. But for us, it's a healing. It's a purification before we enter into healing. You know, I know I'm going over my time, and I'm really happy that you're patient with me, but I just want to share one last story with you about Creator God. And I learned this about 6th grade, about the water molecule. I remember that. And I was sitting in the seminary class one day, and I was thinking about that water molecule. And I was thinking about God when He came here to earth. That He came here in a human form. And I was learning that we're almost all water, right? About 85% maybe. And then I learned and thought back, well, they told us that water molecules are made up of atoms, and atoms never go away. They're forever. They don't disappear. So if God was walking on the earth and He, like the rest of us, were actually sweating, those atoms were vaporizing and rising into the environment, where they got caught up in the wind and they were blown all over the earth. And they came together with so many other molecules that they started to form condensations of vapor and water, right? And then it got to be so severe of a collection of molecules that the skies turned dark, and that was all of the rain up there, and they fell down and it nurtured the earth, right? And then I said, that's why those that are teaching in the seminary say God is everywhere, because He is everywhere. God's in us, here. Right? God lives in us because we drink that water. It's always recirculating. Right? We're taking in God's molecules. We're taking in each other's molecules. We depend on each other for survival. We're all related. Gaki and agi wagamag, we say, as an Ojibwa person, I say that a lot. I said, we're all related. Doesn't matter who we are. We're dependent on each other for survival. But that just doesn't mean Mananduaki, spirits of the earth. It includes those trees. It includes those fish, those deer, those things that fly. We're all related. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for allowing me to stand up here and in some way share a spiritual journey, because that's what it is for me. It's a spiritual journey. And for me to be able to stand up here when 35 years ago, if you saw me, I was sitting on a bus bench in Minneapolis, like that. But through God's willingness, and for my own willingness to say, God, I need you. Gishay manado. Taka we do kawashin way ni ani nindana way ma ganaduk. Niji anashina big. We suck in to go. That's how the spirits know me. Thank you.